Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of TCG Talk, back today with another video. And in today's video, I wanted to do a discussion on what makes a hero in Flesh and Blood have a negative play experience when playing against it, and generally give the community a not complete opinion, but a majority opinion that X hero is not fun to play against, win or loss, right? Oldhim recently living legend, and I wanted to kind of talk about what I think some of the living legend heroes like Oldhim, Prism, Chain, and Starvo, Bravo Star of the Show, caused to make them have negative play experiences. We're just going to discuss it and kind of get your thoughts on it, and I'd love to hear it. But yeah, if you are new to the channel, welcome. Thank you so much for joining. If you're a long-standing member, thank you so much as well. Feel free to check out the Patreon and the Discord down below for some added benefits to the channel, as well as access to an amazing community where we talk every single day in the Discord, over 400 members. Super, super great. Yeah, we'll get right into it. So I'll bring up the Excel sheet here in a second. But basically, I took the 4 living legend heroes in Bravo Star of the Show, Chain, Oldhim, and Prism, and then I took some meta heroes currently post Oldhim, like Lexi, Uziri, Azalea, Fi, and Dromai, and even Katsu, if you want to add in, but I didn't put Katsu in this one, and said, okay, why is it that these decks like Lexi, Azalea, and Uziri, who are really good, especially like Lexi and Dromai, what makes them really good, but makes people say, like, I hate playing against this hero. This hero is not fun to play against. It's not good for the game, or it's not, good for casual players to play against. It's not fun, like win, loss, or draw. Like, it's not a fun thing, right? And then you have heroes like Bravo Star of the Show, Chain, Oldhim, and Prism that are not fun to play against from a general viewpoint. Whether you agree or disagree, a large portion of the community with all 4 of those heroes have openly said these heroes are not fun to play against, right? They're not enjoyable. And the initial reaction, there's 2 initial reactions. One, and it's in my circle, or like the general circle I talk to, is like really competitive players. They're like, well, those heroes you have to play around. You have to think a little bit deeper. You have to go into second cycle. You have to do all these things. You have to really tech for them. And that's what makes people get annoyed. And to a certain extent in competitive circles, that is true. However, the one thing I want to say is, like Oldhim, for example, a lot of competitive players might be like, well, if you play the right deck and you put in tech pieces, anti-fatigue pieces, put some reactions, have a game plan, be able to pitch stack, have your second cycle ready, you can beat him, right? And it's not as negative. And some people see that as a challenge, which is fine. But the reason I wanted to bring this up is not everybody is a Pablo Pintor or a Michael Hamilton or a Hayden Dale or any of those people, right? It's really like a lot of the casual players, like if I go grab 30 people at an armory or 50 people out from armories, I guarantee you only a handful, if that, can do those type of things, can pitch stack like 10, 20 cards deep, can remember exactly where stuff is in their deck, can pay attention to what the opponent's pitching. Most people aren't that talented at the game, no matter how much they play, and it's not a hit on them, that's just how it is. So from a casual community standpoint and a slight competitive community standpoint, what else about these heroes makes them more negative to play against? And, your second reaction might be, well, TCG Talk, well, Dylan, you just got to get better, right? Like, get good. They're good heroes. They have good hero abilities. They're really tuned decks, and they're just really good, and that happens in card games. And I agree with you, but I think there's some mechanics about these heroes, along with a common denominator about them, that I want to show that makes them negative to play against. So we're going to pull this up here. I'm going to flash the first sheet. I made a sheet with like all of the heroes, which I'm not going to get into. It's too much information overload. So for the second sheet, I made the top 4 heroes are all of the living legend heroes, and Bravo Star of the Show, Chain, Oldhim, and Prism. And then you have the bottom 5, which are just good heroes. So 2 things. The first thing you want to mention that I think is a common denominator is heroes that have negative play experiences or feel negative to play against is because there's a large majority of the heroes in the game that are just very, very, very unfavored against them, to the point where it's considered a polarizing matchup. When I say polarizing matchup, I mean, Oldhim into Dorinthia. That matchup is probably is 60-40 or better favored for Oldhim. Or Chain into, any Chain into dash, right? Really, really hard for dash, even Tree Frog dash. Prism, a big one, is like Prism into Rangers, right? As an Azalea or a Lexi main, or even a Riptide, even though she never played Riptide against Riptide, as an Azalea or a Lexi main, you could have played perfectly in that matchup, drew the good cards, did everything you did, and still lose. Because that's just the way that matchup is. Because Spectre, as a mechanic, there's no way you can board clear, right? Now, that's okay. In card games, there's going to be times where, like, that's just your counter, right? The matchup's just your counter. But the thing is, as you can see on the far right over here, if these matchups, if you start to get over half the field having like a polarizing matchup into the hero, that's when it becomes bad, right? That's when you don't want, like, I'm a widen it up here for y'all just so y'all can see it a little bit easier. That's when you don't want that to be a thing, right? And so a good example of this is, so these are the 4 heroes. So this data I took from my own opinion, obviously, Talishar, like all-time stats. I took my ProQuest and my Road Nationals data that I've kept that you've seen me display on the channel, and I looked up some like bigger events, obviously, and saw like how they fared, especially back in like the old Prism and Chain days, to make sure that I was correct on this. If you disagree with any of these, let me know in the comments. It's totally fine. It's just a discussion point. But based off the data and based off my opinion, the average Living Legend hero had 8 or more polarizing matchups. Star of the Show had the least amount of polarizing matchups. I think the mechanic was just broken on that hero. Chain, 2/3 of Chain's matchups I considered polarizing. Half of Oldheim's matchups I considered polarizing. And just under 2/3 of the matchups for Prism I considered polarizing. So if you look at Star of the Show, against Azalea, Kano, Katsu, Levia, Lexi, Rhinar, Bolton, and Viserai, I considered all those 60-40 or better favored for Bravo Star of the Show. Chain, again, all these heroes I considered 60-40 or better, right? Oldheim, it was the least, honestly, not the least, but like the least in percentage, pretty much considered polarizing. Like there's certain decks you just weren't going to win against Oldheim unless he messed up and you drew perfectly. Like the Icelander matchup, insanely hard to win. It's possible, but been very, very hard. The Azalea matchup, you know, the best Azalea players in the world get that matchup to 40-60. Arachne, same thing, right? Dorinthia, extremely difficult for Dorinthias to win. Katsu is, in my opinion, the biggest auto loss ever in Flesh and Blood is Katsu against Oldheim. You can win. There have been Katsus who have won, but it's pretty much an auto loss. And then Prism. Prism was a really bad culprit of it, too. And I think Prism's polarizing matchups were the worst. Like Prism against Azalea. Like Prism against Rangers. Literally impossible to win. They, in my opinion, they like have to mess up or something crazy has to happen, or you have to tech completely against them, right? If you were going to an event as a Azalea player or a Lexi player, maybe because Lexi was a little bit more relevant, and you knew 40% of the field was going to be Prisms, you don't take Lexi, right? She could literally gatekeep certain heroes from being relevant in the game competitively, like Dorinthia, any hero that can't board clear. Dorinthia, Rangers, Icelander, Kano, right? Levia, even. Bolton could a little bit, but not really, right? Like those, or if you couldn't pop every aura she put out, or you couldn't board clear, then you're pretty much irrelevant in the meta. She lost to aggro, yes, in Chain, Phi, Katsu, and Rhinar because of the poppers. But overall, she had super polarizing matchups. So as you can see over here, most of them had polarizing matchups. And your original answer to this might be, well, they were just TCG talk. They were Dylan. They were just really good heroes, right? They were just really strong, really powerful, had really good decks, and that's what made them seem polarizing when really it's just the cards. I don't agree with that. I think that there were certain mechanics for each of them that caused them to be able to just run over 2/3 of the decks that made it to where any good deck in the format, there should be an out for you to beat it in some way or shape or form. The out might be little, but if you play correctly, I have a feeling everyone should have a chance. And for the most part, some of these heroes, like, you just straight up didn't have a chance unless they did something to give you a chance. Basically, if they played their game correctly, you weren't getting in. So, like, Starvo's mechanic, obviously the +2 dominate. Like, need we say more? That wasn't really that big a deal. Chain, the fact that you gave a hero Carrion Husk that also could play 3 or 4 attacks from Banish Zone mid to late game, right? Basically playing off 7 to 8 card hands while also having access to a 6 block and Grasp of the Arknight and Arcanite Skullcap if they so chose it, or Ebonfold if they want to go more aggressive. That was a bad mechanic mix. Oldheim, the fact that a hero can literally, without actually giving up a card to the graveyard, can block one with Shield, one with Crown, and then off Tunic, Earth React, or, basically be able to block 4 to 5 damage without even giving up a card from hand was really, really bad. And it just created a negative play experience. And then Prism with Spectre. Don't even get me started. The mechanic is just not good for the game, in my opinion. And Luminaris and Spectre together create a really negative play experience. So it wasn't that the hero is just a good hero. It was that there were certain mechanics that basically ousted like 2/3 of the decks against that hero, which created a negative play experience. If you look at the current heroes, and this is where I can show you that like just because a deck's good doesn't mean it has to have a negative play experience. You have Lexi, which a lot of people are complaining about because people don't like the fact that Ranger is good. Let's be real here. It has nothing to do with Lexi's mechanics or anything like that. It's the fact that Ranger is good now and people don't like it, in my opinion. So Lexi only has 3 like 60-40 matchups, in my opinion, if not even 2, if you want to be kind of argue. I think Levia, she's like 60-40 into personally. I think Riptide, this is one people might argue because there's not enough data yet, is 60-40 into. And I think Bolton, she hurts really bad because of frailty. Other than that, like what else would you say is a 60-40 matchup for Lexi? I can't think of one. I can think of a lot where she's like 55 to 60 range, right? She's pretty favored into a lot of matchups, but there's not really a matchup where she's like super 60-40 or 40-60 into. I deemed only 3. With Uziri, I only deemed 1, which is Levia. I think Uziri is pretty 50-50 in everything. She does really well into decks like Lexi, right? And she's pretty favored. I'd say she's like 55 to 60 range, but she's not like polarizing. And then you have Azalea. I think she has 4 polarizing matchups: Riptide, Rhinar, Levia, and Katsu, right? Phi has 4 polarizing matchups. Arachne just dunks on. Jeromai does really well against Levia and Rhinar. And then Jeromai is kind of the next biggest one at 9, but even Jeromai that I deemed having 9, which was Uziri, Bolton, Riptide, Kano, Icelander, Dorinthia, Dash, Azalea, Arachne, it's still not as high as any of these polarizing matchups. So, again, I know it's like splitting hairs, but I don't think it's necessarily that. I think what creates a negative play experience with heroes is the fact that there's so many heroes against them that just don't have an out, right? Or don't have any chance of winning unless you're like a PT winning or Pro Tour level player. And if most people that play this game aren't Pro Tour level players, right? And you have to think in that context. So just my thought. I don't think this is like meant to be a negative or a positive or anything like that. It's just a community discussion point. I want to make more videos like this where I bring up facets of the game and get y'all's thoughts on it as a community, because I'm always really excited to see what y'all do. Please note like uber negativity in the comments. Don't tell people to get good or get better. That's just not the way you should look at this. But I would love to hear y'all's thoughts in general on the meta and see if you agree or disagree with me. But yeah. Hopefully you like this type of content. If you did, please do like, comment, subscribe. If not me, it's totally fine. Go to our Fleshbread Career, leave a like, comment, subscribe on their stuff so we can get more people seeing this game. And I'll see y'all next time on TCG Talk. Thank y'all so much. Have a great night.